Hello and welcome to today's screencast for your lesson on the lymphatic system. Before I go through what we're doing today, this is your team's general chat. If you go to files for me, lymphatic system, and could you please download the tissue fluid and blank fill starter and also download the fluid worksheet. The PowerPoint I'm going to go through on this screencast, so you don't need to download it, but if you'd like to, that's absolutely fine. Before we start, tissue fluid blank fill, that is on the kind of Word document I gave you before last week's lesson. Obviously we didn't do last week's lesson because that was parents' evening. However, I sent you a Word document that I want you to read through. This is based on that, okay? So please don't use that as notes, i.e. just copying it down. But if you want to remind yourself, if you read that document first, then this will be a bit easier for you. So let's go on to today's lesson. First of all, we're looking at fluids, specifically lymph fluid and the lymphatic system. This was a past exam question. Okay, so describe how tissue fluid is formed from plasma. This is what we're going to go through today with regards to the lymphatic system. As I said, we're going to tailor it around this question. So before we start, if you can just do that little starter activity, so that Word document for me, please. So if you pause this and give that a go. Okay, so I'm going to go through the answers now for the fill in the blanks. So what we should have is, number one is arterioles. Remember, arterioles are smaller versions of arteries, carry oxygenated blood. Then the next answer is 1. Then we've got the next fill in the blank is hydrostatic pressure, nutrients and oxygen, red blood cells, capillaries, carbon dioxide, edema, lymphatic, and then finally white blood cells. So that is what we're going to be going through in today's lesson. But before we actually go through today's lesson, we need to recap the blood and blood vessels really. So on the other document I've given you, you have got the two first boxes in regards to blood composition and then blood vessels. If you could pause this now and just give those a go for me, please. Once you've done them, we'll go through the answers. So hopefully you've paused it now and you've given it a go. So the answers you should have are: the composition of blood is plasma, red blood cells, erythrocytes, white blood cells, leukocytes, and platelets. Remember, plasma is 95% water and takes up the majority of our composition of blood, okay? So, blood vessels, the kind of answers that I was looking for. If you have more specific or even more information on this, it's absolutely fine. We've got, that's an artery, and that has high pressure, carries oxygenated blood. You could have had thick elastic walls as well. Then we have a vein there, and again, that is the lowest pressure, so carries blood at low pressure. You could have had to have pocket valves or one-way pocket valves, and they have thin walls. And then finally, the last one is the capillary network, or just the capillaries. Now, capillaries, this is where gases move, this is where gaseous exchange takes place, and this is where tissue fluid is made. This is what we're going through today, okay? So continuing on this worksheet, you've just got a few fill in the blanks to do as I go through this worksheet. So, first of all, what is edema? Now, edema is when tissue fluid accumulates in the tissue, and if not treated, it can actually kill you. Now, here's some pictures of edema. You may have actually seen it before. So, this is edema. I actually think this one is photoshopped and this isn't correct, but you may have seen this occurring in certain people before. Now, this is all to do with the lymphatic system not doing its job properly. And this is that build-up of fluid that accumulates over time, and as it says, it is serious and it can kill you. And we're going through the process today of how we remove this so that we do not get edema. Okay, so we've got 3 fluid types in the body. We've got blood, then we've got tissue fluid, and we've got lymph. So blood travels in our arteries and our veins, our blood vessels. Let's say we've got oxygenated blood in the arteries. Once it leaves the capillaries, it becomes tissue fluid. Then, from tissue fluid, we then get lymph, and we're going to go through that today. Okay, so the first kind of thing we need to go through is this forming of this tissue fluid. So tissue fluid is the liquid that surrounds the cells, allowing for transportation between blood and cells, e.g. gaseous exchange and diffusion. So Capillary walls are 1 cell thick, that we should know, and are partially permeable. So tissue fluid is a result of an interplay of hydrostatic pressure and osmosis. And we're going to go through hydrostatic pressure and osmosis now, because this is the important stuff, okay? So ignore this here. Hydrostatic pressure, this is the pressure of the blood from when the heart beats, from a heart contraction, and this forces fluid out of the capillaries. So every time we get a heartbeat, or we have a heartbeat, blood leaves the capillaries and goes into the tissue or to the muscle, and this is caused by hydrostatic pressure, and it moves through leaky capillary walls. So dissolved gases and nutrients move with it, i.e. oxygen from arteries or arterioles is going to go into capillaries. Oxygen leaves the capillary and goes into the tissue, and that's because of the heartbeat. That's because of hydrostatic pressure forcing it out of the arteries. Larger plasma proteins, such as albumin, don't pass through the capillaries because they're too large so they stay there. And this is quite important. Okay, so some hydrostatic pressure from the tissue fluid forces fluids back into the capillaries. So what happens is we get a heartbeat and we get oxygen nutrients leave the capillaries and goes to the tissue cell. Okay, and this is because of the hydrostatic pressure. What happens is, because some of this hydrostatic pressure kind of stays in there, some fluid is then flushed back into the capillaries. Now, when the fluid is pushed back into the capillaries, that's carrying carbon dioxide and waste products. So that carbon dioxide and waste product goes back into our capillaries, then to our venules, then to our veins, and then to the heart, and then we breathe out carbon dioxide, and then gaseous exchange takes place at the lungs. So this is what the osmosis is essentially. So it's tissue fluid is mostly returned to the capillaries by the process called osmosis, and it's done that through this. So some hydrostatic pressure, as I said, from the tissue fluid forces fluids back into the capillaries. This is referred to as osmotic pressure. So as water returns to the capillaries, it takes dissolved carbon dioxide and other products with it. So remember, it's mostly plasma. Blood is made up of mostly plasma. So when that hydrostatic pressure happens, i.e. a heartbeat, plasma is forced out of the capillaries, carrying with it oxygen. Now this plasma is now just floating around the tissue cells, and this is where oxygen goes to the muscle. When it is forced back into the capillaries due to this osmotic pressure, it carries with it carbon dioxide and waste product, and that returns to the capillary, then to the venules and to the veins. So there is remaining fluid, and this remaining fluid, there's 10% left, and this is known as lymph. Okay, and then this lymph drains into the lymphatic system, specifically the lymph vessels, to rejoin the blood system near the top of the body. Otherwise, edema occurs, i.e. if this 10% of fluid that was left in the cell stayed there, and then it happened again, and then 10% stayed there, and then it happened again, and 10% stayed there. Eventually, edema would occur. You'd get this fluid staying within the tissue, that could then cause death. So what we need is this remaining fluid, this 10%, which is known as lymph, just gets drained into the lymphatic system, specifically lymph vessels, and essentially, further on down the line, it rejoins the blood system near the top of the body. And that is what happens. We have lymph nodes. So these are lymph nodes here. We have lobes in our armpits and our groinal area. We have them all over our body, but mainly groinal area and armpits. And the lymph passes through the lymphatic system and drains back into the blood system. So it goes through here, in here, and then it goes back to the circulatory system. And it does that to keep blood volume levels the same. If this 10% of plasma that stayed at the cell tissue, if it went into the lymph system and then just disappeared, we'd lose blood volume, which is also dangerous. So lymph passes through the lymphatic system and drains back into the blood or circulatory system. Lymphocytes are part of the immune system and help to filter out foreign material from the lymph, i.e. the white blood cells, remember, leukocytes and lymphocytes, etc. So there are your notes. If you needed to pause this or rewind or go back over this a few times to understand it, that's absolutely fine. However, the main process is this summary. Now this summary is the main information that we need to get from what we've done today. And this picture here, this diagram, will hopefully kind of show us. So we've got let's say we start up here, arteries turn into arterioles, yeah, we'll go this way because the arrow's going this way. So we've got arterioles. Then what happens is oxygenated blood comes into the capillary, and then when it's in the capillary, blood plasma is forced out through leaky capillary walls by hydrostatic pressure, which is i.e. the pressure from the heart beating. So the fluid, the plasma, carries nutrients and oxygen to the cell. So this is the tissue cell, all of this stuff all around here. Now it is known as tissue fluid as opposed to plasma. So this fluid must return to the blood system, otherwise edema occurs. So the majority of fluid returns to the capillaries. So it returns carrying carbon dioxide and waste products and then goes out through the venule to the veins back to the heart. However, remaining fluid, the 10%, drains into the lymphatic system or lymphatic vessels and lymphatic system, which is the green one here. Then all it does is lymphatic vessels carry it to the lymph nodes and it rejoins the blood system near the top of the body and it goes back into the heart and we keep our blood volume. That is this whole lesson in summary. Okay, now what I want you to do is, this task is going to be a homework task. So before you do this task, on the worksheet you have, there is a link to a forms quiz. I want you to do that quiz and I want you to do it by 4:10 because that is when our lesson would be over. So it needs to be done by 4:10. It won't take you long at all. It's not a difficult quiz. It's very much a true-false quiz. The answers that you type, if you don't type it exactly the same as me, it'll say it's wrong when it's not wrong. So do not worry about that. Okay, it's because that's just the way the computer system works, unfortunately. So I want you to make those notes, and I also want you to do the quiz. Then for homework that I want by tomorrow evening is describe how tissue fluid is formed from plasma. So I want you to answer that and give that a go. You can use your notes to start with in terms of looking over your notes. However, when you answer the question, please don't use your notes. Just do it from memory, okay? So I want you to describe how tissue fluid is formed from plasma, and I want this by tomorrow evening, Wednesday, okay? Let's say by 4:10 tomorrow. You should be able to get it done today, but I'll give you till tomorrow, and I'll say 4:10, okay? And I'll give you feedback individually. Thank you for listening. Bye.